Okay, let's conclude our discussion of social perception today. Just to kind of remind you about what the format of the course is, we're going to proceed one by one through the various topics in social cognition. There are basically three elements here. First, social perception, social memory, and social thinking. The problem of social perception is first, trying to figure out how to describe the social stimulus. What's the vocabulary that we use for describing the social stimulus? And second, try to figure out what kinds of perceptual processes allow us to form these internal mental representations of the objects and events in the social world. Okay. Again, if you think about perception in the non-social domain, what the task of perception is to figure out not whether an object is present or not in the environment, that's a problem for sensation, but what the object is, to try to figure out what its form or its shape is, what its location is, and what its activity is. In the social domain, there are analogous tasks, but they go by different names. In the social domain, when we talk about the form of a person, what we mean is kind of what they're like socially, what they're like personally, what their personality traits are, what their emotional states are, what their motives and goals are, and not just what they're doing in terms of a raw description of their behavior, but what the social significance of their behavior is. This is what we're trying to figure out. Okay. In the non-social domain, perception is what we do with a pattern of stimulus energy that radiates from a stimulus and falls on our sensory receptors. And that's what we do in the social domain as well, except that we don't think about it that way typically. Usually, if you look at the whole history of studies of person perception and impression formation that have come down to us since Ash did the first one in the late 1940s, most of the stimulus information in studies of social perception come in the form of linguistic descriptions. It could be something like the classified ads from the New York Review of Books that we started out this set of lectures looking at, or it could be something as straightforward as the 6 or 7 item trait ensembles that Ash used in his classic experiments. But usually we think about the stimulus information for social perception coming in the form of language, coming in the form of words, verbal descriptions of what people are like, and then we're supposed to do something with them, go beyond the information given in the verbal stimulus. But if you think about it for a second, maybe it doesn't take even a second, if you think about it for a second, a lot of the information for social perception doesn't come in the form of words. What a lot of the information for social perception constitutes is physical descriptions, physical stimuli, what things look like, the behaviors that people engage in, how people appear to us. The largely undealt with task in the study of social perception is trying to figure out how we get from the physical social stimulus, the social stimulus as a physical entity that can be described in more or less physical terms, to some impression, internal mental representation of what that person is like as a person, what his traits or motives or emotions or whatever are. So what I want to do today is to give you a couple of examples of lines of research in social cognition that have tried to abandon linguistic descriptions, at least as far as the stimulus elements are concerned, and instead focus on the perception of people that begins with the physical stimulus of their appearance and their behavior. Okay, so again, we usually think about our impressions of people as being encoded linguistically, a verbal description of somebody. What we want to talk about today is how we get to that verbal description. What physical features of the stimulus give rise to the kinds of impressions of the person, or for that matter, of the situation, that we encode linguistically. In an early lecture in the series, I contrasted two different views of the perceptual process. First, the constructivist view that comes to us from Helmholtz, that basically says that stimulation is inherently ambiguous and perception poses a problem to be solved by the perceiver, and that what the perceiver does in solving the problem of determining what it is that's out there, where's it going, what's it doing, where is it, and all of that stuff, the perceiver has to draw on inference, make inferences about these things, draw on world knowledge to supplement the vague, fragmentary, and ambiguous information provided by the stimulus. The alternative point of view, which comes to us from J.J. Gibson and his students and colleagues, basically says you don't need any kind of inferential process, you don't need any knowledge drawn from memory or anything else like that for perception. All the information you need for perception is provided by the stimulus itself. There's no need for so-called higher order cognitive processes involved in inference, and there's no need for anything like what we were talking about last time, the role of implicit theories of personality in helping us form our judgments of people. This point of view, which began with non-social perception, the perception of depth and motion and other things that are topics for the typical topics for the ecological approach to perception, has more recently been imported into social psychology by a number of investigators, especially the Barron and MacArthur, who have argued vigorously for the application of Gibsonian principles of ecological perception in the social case. Forget about linguistic descriptions. Our perceptual systems didn't evolve to deal with language, so they say. Our perceptual systems evolved to deal with physical objects in a physical environment. So what Barron and MacArthur and others like them have tried to do is to try to figure out what the physical information is that provides, what the physical stimulus information is that we use for social perception. And they've argued that there's actually quite a bit of physical information in the environment, information that doesn't require any kind of linguistic transmission or anything like that, that gives us a lot of information about what people's emotions are, what their goals are, what their traits are, and so on. First and foremost, facial expressions, okay, which we're going to talk about quite a bit today. Second, bodily orientation and movement and posture. If you're talking to somebody and he leans forward toward you, you get the impression he's actually interested in what you have to say. If you're talking to somebody and he turns his back on you and begins writing on the blackboard or something like that, you begin to think he's really not interested in what you have to say. I haven't said anything, right? It's my physical posture that's giving you this information. Vocal cues, the same way. I love you, honey. The kind of phrase that you're going to hear next weekend. Okay, I love you very much. Well, it depends on how you say it. What the words really mean. Interpersonal distance. Sure, cultures vary on this, but that's not important. The important point is that the physical distance from one person to another gives us information about the relationship between those individuals. Whether they make eye contact, whether they touch each other in the course of some kind of social interaction. Physical appearance and mode of dress communicate a lot about what a person is and what the person's like. You go to a hospital and you see a staff member in a long white coat. What do you think? The doctor, okay? Real doctors wear long coats, okay? Interns, aides, and other people like that don't wear long coats. Physicians actively protect their privilege of wearing a long coat because the long coat communicates authority, it communicates status in a hospital situation. The physician doesn't have to say anything at all as long as he or she is wearing a long coat. And then, of course, there's the environment in which the person appears and in which the person's behavior takes place, especially those aspects of the social environment that are under the control of the person that we're trying to perceive. So none of this really involves language as the medium of stimulation. Okay, we're unpacking the physical, the social environment and trying to make some kind of sense of it. As I say, where this has worked out in a lot of detail is with facial expressions of emotion. And here we owe a lot to Paul Ekman at the University of California, San Francisco, somebody whose work you probably heard about in other courses, either in psychology or in cognitive science, who spent a lot of time focusing on nonverbal communication between people. Not verbal communication, the exchange of words, but nonverbal communication, the exchange of facial expressions and vocal prosody and posture and all of that kind of business. Now, Ekman himself has done a lot of this work in the context of the detection of deception, and he's argued that nonverbal cues can provide what he calls leakage, what other psychologists also call leakage, the cues that tell you that what the person is telling you verbally might not be true. This is work that is now becoming of some interest to, say, the Department of Homeland Security when they try to identify potential terrorists who might be trying to walk through airport security. And this idea actually has its origins in the work of Charles Darwin, who, after he wrote The Origin of Species and other important documents on evolutionary theory, wrote a little book called The Expression of Emotion in Men and Animals, in which he argued that there were certain emotional expressions that human beings shared in common with other animals, bears, dogs, cats, cows, and so on, and argued that these facial expressions of emotion, especially facial expressions of emotion, were part of our evolutionary heritage, things that we shared with other animals by virtue of the principle of evolutionary continuity. And the idea then that we have these more or less automatic or reflexive ways of expressing our internal emotional states on our faces and other parts of our bodies implies that we have a perceptual apparatus that is built by evolution to extract exactly that kind of information from the social stimulus. We read emotion off other people's faces. Ekman and his colleagues have argued that there are roughly half a dozen of these basic emotions, which we humans share with other animals, especially primates, especially mammals, and that we have a pre-wired mechanism both to express these basic emotions in our faces and other bodily gestures, but also that we have a pre-wired set of the pre-wired perceptual apparatus that is geared to reading precisely these faces and telling us what another person's emotional states are. So here are these are posed by an actor in Ekman's employ, but these are kind of prototypical the facial expressions of these various emotions. Okay, so for example, what are the facial cues that tell us that somebody's happy? Well, that's clearly a happy face. Okay, and the big facial cue is the smile, the upturned corners of the mouth. There's some debate in the literature about whether you should show your teeth or not. This person is actually showing a lot of teeth. Okay, but there's also when you show teeth, you may also communicate anger, as you'll see in a couple of minutes. But that smile is really a facial cue, and when we see somebody who looks like that, we immediately, without thinking about it, okay, all the information you need for perception is provided by the stimulus. We have an impression of this person as a happy camper. Here we have, yes? No, I'm going to talk about mirror neurons later in the course, okay? It's a very interesting idea, okay? But it doesn't have, that's a question that's going to go over most people, including me, right now. But mirror neurons were discovered only relatively recently, okay? And if you look at the dates here, Sylvan Tompkins was doing this in the early 60s. I mean, people barely knew about neurons in the 1960s. But to make a long story short, yes, it's entirely possible that in the course of perceiving somebody else's smile, we activate motor programs that would lead us to smile as well. And it's that information that creates the percept. That would be a short and completely inadequate version of the mirror neuron story. So it's possible, and you'll see later on how this might be relevant. But right now, let's just look at the stimulus cues that tell us that this person is surprised. First, the widening of the eyes, okay, and the opening of the mouth. That's not a smile. It's more of a, oh, that's interesting. But Darwin argued, and Ekman showed in cross-cultural studies, that people, in terms of cross-race emotion perception, people will, regardless of their cultural heritage, will tend to perceive this person as being surprised, okay, being astonished, something like that. And you don't have to say, well, here's a picture of somebody who's surprised. You just know it. You know it immediately, in exactly that Gibson sense. Your perception is not mediated by anything else. Your perceptual apparatus has evolved in such a way that you perceive this person as surprised. Facial cues to sadness. The lowering of the eyebrows, especially the outer corners of the eyebrows. Mouth tends to be closed when you're sad. This one is a little open. Okay, there's some individual differences here, but the lower lip is out. So if you just kind of do this for a second, okay, lower your eyelids, okay, close your mouth, and push your upper lip out. You look very sad. Okay, you really do. Okay, and I didn't have to be taught that, right? Back when I was a dog or a lizard or something like that, evolution put this perceptual apparatus, organized my perceptual apparatus in just this way. Facial cues to fear. Here the eyebrows are raised, not lowered. The eyes are opened wide, kind of like the surprise, but not exactly. The eyes aren't round here the way they are in surprise. The head's back, the chin is tucked in, and the mouth is open, again, but not open in a smile, not open in a grimace either. Again, the idea is this is a physical stimulus that gives us the impression that this person is afraid. Disgust, okay? The eyes narrow, maybe squinting. The upper lip is raised, okay? A little snarl there. Maybe your nostrils are flaring, mostly because there's probably some smell that's elicited this face. But Darwin and Ekman and others, but especially Darwin, makes a point that when dogs smell something foul, they look just like this, right? And the next time you got a dog, okay, and your dog is happy, you'll see him put on a really nice smile. And when your dog is scared, you'll see him put on that scared face. That was Darwin's idea, that not only has evolution built into us an apparatus for expressing our emotions on the face, evolution has also built in a perceptual apparatus that allows us to extract this information from other people's faces and so perceive their internal emotional states. Okay, and then finally anger. Okay, the eyebrows are drawn down and together, kind of a scowl. You might raise the upper eyelid a little bit, press your lips together, push your lower lip up, and contract your jaw muscles, and that's the facial expression of anger. So again, the idea here is that there are these cues, non-verbal cues to people's internal states. Ekman himself has developed what he calls a facial action coding scheme that he trains people in for a fee. This is a money-making enterprise here. Basically trains people to read these expressions, even in people who are trying to cover up what their emotional states are. It's a very complicated system, takes some time to learn it, but it's based on the existence of certain muscle action units in the facial musculature, like there's a muscle that raises the inner brow, does that, okay? You can be Groucho Marx. And there's a lip corner puller, one that pulls them up or pulls them down or whatever, a jaw clencher. That's kind of verbal descriptions of what these muscles do. But there's a relatively small set of muscles in the head or the neck that basically accomplish these various kinds of movements. And again, the idea is that this is all basically reflexive in nature, that when you're angry, there's a reflexive response to the anger, puts the anger on the face, and that the perception has a kind of reflexive quality to it as well. So for example, here are the muscle actions that underlie the physical description of the face. You want to put your eyebrows, draw them down and together, you use 3 different facial muscles for that purpose. You want to raise your upper eyelid, there's another muscle that comes in. You want to press your lips together, you use the orbicularis oris muscle. You want to push your lower lip up, you've got to use your mentalis muscle. Some of you had mothers who told you that it takes 27 muscles to frown, but only a single muscle to smile. It's true, it turns out. There are a lot of muscles. It's a lot of it takes a lot of work to frown, so you might as well save effort and just smile all the time. But again, we don't have to actually go to the skeletal musculature to understand what's going on here. The facial cues are the information for the perception of emotion on the face. It's just that these facial cues are themselves a product of certain kinds of muscle activity. Another example of this is one that Ekman talks about a lot. It turns out that there are 2 different kinds of smile. Okay, there is what's known as the Duchenne smile, named after a French investigator who first described this, which is the kind of smile that people put on when it's a genuine smile. It's an involuntary smile when they're happy. They just kind of do this, and basically involves only 2 muscles: the zygomaticus major, okay, which produces the smile, and the orbicularis oculi, which raises and opens the eyes a little bit. The other kind of smile is sometimes known as the Pan American smile, because it was the smile. It's essentially the smile that public service workers are taught, like airline cabin attendants and clerks in grocery stores and things like that. Where they put that smile on, right? And it's a fake smile, right? You know they'd rather be dead or rather you be dead or something like that. But they got to smile because it's a condition of their job. This polite, voluntary smile, which involves just the zygomaticus muscle, not the eyes, okay, is a way that Ekman has of teaching people who's really happy and who's not really happy. These guys are ostensibly really happy. These guys are just doing their jobs. But again, the whole point here is that you don't have to, are you really happy today? You know, or is that just your job? You can read it off the face. You don't need language. You don't need to think about it. We simply have these automatic reflexes built into us. Okay, so that's the general idea. Now, I'm not going to go on and talk about all of the ramifications of Ekman's work. I just use this as an example of the immediate perception of somebody else's internal emotional state and the general argument that not only has our emotional apparatus evolved in such a way that we automatically express these emotions on our face, the emotions that we feel, our perceptual apparatus has apparently evolved in such a way that we automatically extract this information from the stimulus and read the individual's emotion. There's a very interesting application of this to the Mona Lisa. People have always wondered about this smile. There's even a Nat King Cole song about it. Lots of theories in art history about what makes the Mona Lisa's smile so strange, which a lot of people think it is. Some art historians argue that this so-called archaic smile, the kind of smile that you find in ancient Egyptian and Sumerian and Greek statuary, superimposed on a more modern woman, painted in the Renaissance, or maybe the smile is an index over momentary mood, or it's ambiguous in some ways. Well, it turns out the Mona Lisa smile is ambiguous. An investigator by the name of Sebi applied Ekman's facial action coding system to the Mona Lisa and discovered that the Mona Lisa smile was composed of 83% happiness, okay, 9% disgust, 6% fear, and 2% anger. Okay, that you kind of those are the components of the smile. Whether that helps us really understand why Leonardo painted the Mona Lisa this way, probably not. Okay, did Leonardo somehow intuit this? Well, maybe. It's not clear that this is a great contribution to art history, but it's a very nice example of how you can use the Ekman facial action coding system at least to do some kind of analysis of a particular work of art. Okay, so that's basically all about that. Let's move from beautiful faces to the problem of facial beauty. What is it that makes faces attractive? Why are we attracted more to some faces than to others? This problem of physical attractiveness is a really important one for social psychology because it turns out that an individual's physical attractiveness is the most powerful determinant of whether we're going to like that person or not. Okay, we know all about you can't judge a book by its cover, but the fact of the matter is we do. Okay, the fact of the matter is that of all the things, they can share your political beliefs, they can share your taste in music, they can do all this other kind of stuff, but if they don't look good, you're not going to like them nearly as much as you will if they do. And it turns out that physical attractiveness influences a whole host of other judgments. This is the origin of the halo effect. If somebody's physically attractive, we tend to believe that they have other socially attractive traits that they